Hello and welcome to this week's press preview. We're down to 3 teams for playoff football. Alongside Scott Richey, I'm Aren Dow. We had a lot to talk about, even with just 3 games. We're getting down to the quarterfinals here for playoff football. And I don't think we should bury the lead. Arthur almost upset Maroa.
That is true.
Arthur, the Knights had a really good game. They were up, with a minute 10 left, and Maroa came back and scored a game-winning touchdown, help preserve their run in the playoffs. But Jack Hockaday, was pulled from the game a little bit. Had an injury. It's been lingering since I believe week 8.
Yeah.
And that's gonna be tough to deal with if he's out.
Yeah. Well, and from what I understand, they did plug him back in for that last drive. Kind of led the charge one-legged out there. It's almost easier to talk about who did play for Maroa against Arthur, because the list is maybe shorter because they had a lot of guys out with injuries. Clayton Zills, I think, ended up with a concussion. Brock Elliott did not play. I believe Chad Howell also was hurt. So that's start naming off a lot of their starters, and with Hockaday playing on one leg, maybe Maroa should just be glad they made it. Made it out of Arthur alive, because the Knights were definitely kind of primed for an upset there. And now, moving on to the quarters, and it's going to be undefeated against undefeated with Maroa playing Camp Point Central. Camp Point was a 2A. I believe they made it to at least the semifinals last year.
Right.
So they dropped down to 1A after their co-op split, and it should make for an interesting game this weekend. They definitely are kind of a polar opposite offensively to Maroa. They don't throw the ball very much at all. In fact, there's some games where I've checked, they haven't thrown attempted even one pass. So they're going to run the ball, almost 350 yards per game rushing for Camp Point Central. And Maroa kind of assuming Jack Hockaday's okay, they're going to want to throw the ball more, but it could end up to kind of a grinded out game. If you see Josh Raths in there at quarterback, he will throw some, but he's definitely more of a running quarterback. And it's just it all kind of hinges on who's going to be healthy Saturday for Maroa.
Right, and for Maroa, even though they're a 1A team, they still have a lot of depth. Injuries, but so the injuries hurt, but they don't have all their skill players gone, but they are limited. Chad Howell, Jack Hockaday, both injured. That takes away a lot of the running game, and Hockaday, he can make things happen on the ground, and that kind of opens the field up a little bit for him in the passing game.
Sure.
Clayton Zills had a great year last year, and I think that's kind of helped direct some attention away from and give Drew Fredrickson. He's had a really big year. He's had a couple 200-yard games for receiving. So if they can find ways to kind of keep plugging players in, I think Maroa will be okay. But they got a lot of injuries, and they'll have to overcome that.
It is worth noting that Arbor Amroski took over at running back with Howell out, and had a monster game for them.
I think he almost doubled his season total. Yeah.
So they this is just another case of next man up.
Right.
And Arbor came through. It's just point of the matter is Maroa is better with Jack Hockaday at quarterback. Any team in our area would be better with Jack Hockaday at quarterback for them. So if he's not 100%, which he hasn't been, he wasn't against Tuscola, he wasn't against Arthur. Still, wins for Maroa, but that gets tougher as you get deeper in the playoffs. Camp Point's not going to roll over for anybody.
Yeah. The other half of 1A, KZ Westfield, who that's another really close game. They scored in the last minute, got a touchdown. Nico Sapina had 3 runs and had I think a 64-yard run to get that last touchdown. But another close game, and almost a team that's has been there every year and kind of been a favorite. They almost got knocked out as well.
Yeah, Carrollton did what no other team had was able to do this year, and it was to keep KZ's offense from just running over them. And because I think that was the first time KZ hadn't scored at least 4 touchdowns, if not 5 touchdowns in a game. And they needed. They got the big one when it mattered the most, and they have the athletes. With Sabina and Austin Glidewell running back, Corey Carver, the not so much of a surprise sophomore anymore. Now that he had a huge receiving game, the first round of the playoffs, and this past week against Carrollton, he was kind of a defensive force. So as much as Coach Jim Sullivan, doesn't want his name to be out there. Corey Carver.
He's hard to miss. I mean, he's 6'4". He's a big guy. So,
and he is kind of showing what his athleticism can give KZ on both sides of the ball.
And Nico Sapina didn't have a great passing game last week. Austin Gladwell had a couple fumbles, so they weren't doing themselves any favors. That offense, they kind of got down a little bit, and I think Jim Sullivan said that it took them a while to recover from those couple early turnovers. So, but it's also worth noting they didn't allow a single point to Carrollton. So I mean that defense still really good, and they've been good all year. I think the Olney is kind of the only game where they've let some points go, and Olney's had a really good passing game all year. So I think if the team is a rushing attack, Casey can stop that. It's it's just a matter of that offense kind of getting back on track.
Well, and this week they're going to see a team that just runs the ball. Tri-Valley beat Argenta this past weekend and didn't attempt a single pass. And truthfully, they didn't move the ball on the ground that well either. It's just some penalties and some fumbles from Argenta kind of turned the tide in Tri-Valley's favor for that win. So Casey has shown the ability to bottle up the run game, and that's pretty much all they're going to see from Tri-Valley. I mean, they quarterback Peyton Roop, he runs the ball a lot, and they also give the ball to their fullback quite a bit, and then they'll run some sweeps here and there with the wingbacks. But it's definitely kind of that old style, grind it out on the ground offense. And KZ, for the most part, has handled that pretty well.
Yeah. And then our final team, who not like Monroe or Casey. I mean, Cerro Gordo men really rolled from the very beginning. I mean, they rolled Athens, and they made it to the third round. They lost to Camp Point in the second round last year. And a really big win for Cerro Gordo Bement. And they'll take on Auburn, which is their third Sangamo team in a row. They played New Berlin and Athens, and now Auburn. Cerro Gordo, I think, it's kind of funny. You see people who haven't seen Cerro Gordo before, and they look at D and J Woods, and they're like, these kids are playing 2A. They're mad. I mean, they shouldn't be on this field. I mean, they look like they're 3 years in college. I think that's taken some of the teams by surprise, and obviously, and this has been hashed to death. But Steve Isbell and D Woods been perfect complement, and having that against some 2A teams, obviously it's done well the first couple of rounds.
Yeah, and Auburn, does continue the parade of Sangamo teams, for the Broncos, but this is going to be their toughest test, of those 3 games. Auburn, did lose a couple games in the regular season. One was a overtime thriller shootout, to Petersburg Porta. They lost by a point against a Porter team that didn't win a game last year and then made the playoffs this year. So they kind of had some kind of magic season going on. And Auburn's other loss was to Williamsville, who is on track right now to be playing in the 3A state title game.
And they lost by a touchdown, too. So.
Yeah, and that's the closest any team has played Williamsville so far this season. I've got Williamsville penciled in, to the 3A championship game. And so you got to think, if Auburn can hang, with the team that's playing, incredibly well and actually, score, 2 touchdowns on Williamsville, that's, almost unheard of this season.
I mean, you look kind of comparably, the way Cerro Gordo played New Berlin and Athens is the same way kind of Auburn's plays, at least score-wise. A little bit different offense for Auburn. They pass a little bit more. Athens, they run the ball, and that's their thing. They had to pass a little bit because they got down, but that's not what they want to do. Auburn, they have a decent passing game, and so they'll see Cerro Gordo will see a little bit different of an offense coming this Saturday.
But I think the Broncos, defensively, they can hang with the team that throws the ball. I mean, you talk about Isbell, being a force offensively. He's really good in the secondary. I mean, he can come away with some picks, and if the Broncos start this weekend's game like they've started their other 2 playoff games, I mean, they've just come out and just beat teams in the first quarter almost, and that was it. So I mean, if they can kind of maybe put a little shock into Auburn, it won't matter how well they throw the ball. I mean, if you're down, a few scores early, it's tough to come back.
So a full slate. We got 3 teams, and all have pretty good chances to move on. I think maybe CGB Auburn is probably the closest match as far as out of the 3. But I think all 3 have a pretty good shot of moving on. But But we're getting down to almost the end of football season, which means the start of basketball season. We have the Turkey Tournament coming up here in a couple weeks, along with all the other Thanksgiving Day tournaments. So it's going to be a full slate for basketball coming up too. So be sure to check out HR Preps. We'll have a full week of a basketball preview for boys and girls. So make sure you check that out. And obviously Saturday we'll be out for this week's playoffs games. So are we done with Preps Pick'em?
I'm not sure. I hope we're done.
I'm
so far down the list. I probably should have quit 3 or 4 weeks ago. But
I know Michael Connolly won last week, so congrats to him. But yeah, so make sure you check hrpreps.com. We'll have coverage of all the playoff games, and we'll have basketball preview stuff. So make sure you watch out for that too.